who we very kindly supporting today. Now, the Knights of Glin have been in these parts since around 1200, and at one time, at the peak of their power, they controlled the land between the Kerry border and Limerick City, and on that land there were 14 castles at one time. Now, you might know Bay Castle, which is still there, and of course Shannon Castle was their headquarters over near Shannagolden. You will see it from the M69. It's up on top of a rock, a hill if you like. Sorry. Now, there were 3 knights. There was the White Knight, who was Tipperary and is usually connected with Loughgore. There was the Knight of Kerry, and there was the Knight of Glin. But today we're in the house of the Knight of Glin. Now, when they were building in Glin, they built just by the river, which was the usual place to build, and the village gradually grew up around it. The original village in Glin just went from the old castle down to the shore, and there was small thatched houses there. And the road went on past the castle then and up to the graveyard. There was a road up there at one time, and that's where the original church was, up in the graveyard in pre-Reformation days. But the tower house in Glin, you can just see the tower now that's left. There were a complex of buildings there in a big walled enclosure which is called a bawn, and it was defensive, and it was actually besieged, and they basically were on the losing side in the wars of that time. But in the 1600s they decided to build a new house, and they built it here. It's actually where the west wing is here. To the west of this you'll see a lower range of buildings, and that's where the original house was. It was a 2-story long thatched house, and the rooms usually opened into each other. There wouldn't have been corridors. Then this house was built.
Congregation of Protestant people living here in Glin during the 1800s. If we look here at this bigger portrait of Richard Dick the duelist, is his nickname, and he was considered to be one of the best duelists in Ireland in his time. If he challenged you, or you challenged him to a duel, he gave you a choice of a pistol at 20 paces or a small sword within a 10-foot circle. On this occasion we see his servant handing him a challenge from a Spaniard to a duel. Richard duly accepted the challenge, and during the course of the duel, Richard on a few occasions thought that he had downed the Spaniard, but for some reason the Spaniard wasn't falling. And the servant, he saw what was happening, that the Spaniard had cheated and that he was wearing a breastplate underneath his vest. And that's why the sword obviously wasn't driving home. So he shouted out to him, "Soy in a sort of the mucka, stick him where you would stick a pig," which of course is the throat. So on the next thrust, Richard drove the sword through the neck and he killed the Spaniard. On the fireplace overhead, we have John Bateman Fitzgerald, the absentee landlord, but it was during his time that Glin Castle was built. And he married Margareta Maria Gwyn. You saw a portrait of her in the other room, and it was because of the dowry that she brought with her that they were able to afford to build the castle. The castle cost £6,000 at the time, and as you've already heard, bankruptcy and debt was always a huge.
During the Elizabethan, Cromwellian and Jacobite wars, and the siege of Glin was on the 5th of July, 5th of July 1600. And during that time, Queen Elizabeth's forces arrived in Glin, led by Sir George Carew, and they took over the castle within a matter of a few days. And the Fitzgeralds were, of course, on the run. The Knight of Glin, Edmund Fitzgerald, at that time, because they had committed treason against the Crown. And we know they moved towards this Dole and Lixna and joined the Fitzmaurices, who were Knights of Kerry, cousins. And eventually, our own history, they joined Hugh O'Neill, Hugh O'Donnell, and you had the flight of the Earls. The Fitzgeralds were eventually pardoned and given some of their land back and allowed to build here on the site of the wing, which incorporated a house called Glin Hall. That was partly burnt in 1740, and this was added in the 1780s by Colonel John Bateman Fitzgerald, who was the 24th Knight of Glin. The last knight and late Knight of Glin was the 29th in direct lineage. He was Desmond Fitzgerald, and I don't know if anybody knows about him, but he was a historian, has written extensively on the art.
They're not very comfortable. They're not the kind of place that you would come to relax, whereas this is a room that you come in, you lie on the couch, you lie in the chairs. The ashes are still in the fireplace from when Dominic and Catherine and the kids were in here last night, sitting down relaxing after dinner. So, the portrait in this room, the ones of interest, are of Desmond, the last knight of Fitzgerald, the late Desmond Fitzgerald, and Alda, the madam. So, Alda has been out in the gardens or in the hall all day. She's walking around. Do say hello, stop and say hello, or if you see Dominic or Catherine or the girls, say hello. They love welcoming people to the house. They, every year when Glin Development asks the family if we can open the house to the public so that we can fundraise, every year they say, who's left to come and see it? They really, you know, they love that people are still interested in the house. So this room has a lot of military reference in it. You can see the standard over there, which is the Royal Glin Fusiliers. So at the time of the volunteers of the 1780s, Glin Fitzgerald family, like all the big families in Ireland, would have had to raise volunteers and armed forces in case of a Napoleonic invasion of the country, which never happened. But there was the Royal Glin Hussars, the Royal Glin Fusiliers, the Royal Glin Artillery. So the standard of one of them is hanging on the wall there, and this here is volunteer furniture is the correct name for it. It's painted cotton, so that's a representation of the Glin Fusiliers or the Glin Hussars parading in the Phoenix Park in Dublin. Now, whether they ever actually went to Dublin and were paraded up there in the Phoenix Park, I don't know, but this was done as a sort of thank you or
for sale until 12 months ago, and the eldest daughter, Catherine, she's married to Dominic West, the film star, she decided that as the family had had the property for 700 years, to be ashamed to let it go, that she'd try at this late stage to take it over and to see if she could hold it.
And the other two daughters, did they want a share of it then, or was it given to Catherine?
The which?
You'd say, hadn't Catherine two sisters?
Yes.
And did they ever look for a share in this? Or?
No. They agreed that if someone could take it on,
right.
They all agreed that if somebody, even if some wealthy person moved in, they'd sell it for a fraction of what it was worth.
Wow.
If they could get somebody that would just take in London, with one of the top gardeners in London, and she's very interested in keeping the gardens here as well, if possible, to try and maintain it. Unfortunately, there's so little of an income, it has been cut down to skeleton staff. There's only a couple of girls come in a day or two a week and try and keep it, and then somebody's paid to mow the lawn. And that's more or less the stage she's at the moment. But Mrs. Milner was the woman that introduced all the plants you're going to see now. She brought them from throughout the planet. She brought them from New Zealand. Find them throughout the whole estate. They grow very well here. There's another tree here. This one is a Turkey oak. It's from Turkey. It's different to the ordinary Irish oak. It has a very long leaf. It has 3 times the length of an Irish oak. The Irish oak would have a much shorter leaf. But very few of the good Irish oaks survived, because when the British were running the country, they went around the country and they cut down all the good oak trees. And the only place to survive was on estates where they wouldn't allow them in to cut them. And they took the wood to England and they built houses, because of very good quality wood, the oak timber. Europe, the myrtles became extinct. And the only place that survived on the whole planet was off the coast of Kerry on Garnish Island and places, where the Gulf Stream came in, and some of them managed to survive there. When Mrs. Milner married in here, she went onto the island and she brought the myrtle trees here to Glin, and she planted them all over, and you can see they're just thriving here in Glin. They're self-seeding, they grow everywhere around the woodlands and that. They have a couple of unusual features. One is that the bark, as you can see, is brown, but during the month of March that will all open up like paper, and the whole bark will go white with the new things and go back brown again. It's evergreen, it comes into full flower now. But the most extraordinary thing about the myrtle tree, if you put your hand on the bark of the myrtle tree, it's ice cold.
Wow.
And it's taking its temperature from 15 foot down. And that's how the tree is so cold. That's how it's so cold. By the 1930s and 40s, disaster struck with kitchen gardens in Ireland because the local county councils gave people so much money to drop horse loads of stone out the side of the public road. They brought around crushers then and they crushed all the stone and threw it on the road. That was their way for building the road. The majority of the kitchen gardens vanished within 10 years. All the walls were knocked. They were all thrown onto the side of the road, and that was the line of the kitchen gardens. The one here at Glin survived with Mrs. Milner when she was running here. And when the international airport was at Foynes, she employed 3 gardeners here to grow all the produce that was wanted for the hotels in Foynes. And they had a pony and trap delivering produce twice a day to Foynes, to the hotels. She also brought back the film stars that were in Foynes and the pilots to stay in the castle and that. And she also then sent, with the planes going to London, she sent over salmon, and she had a violet here at the back. You pick all the violets and fly them over to London and sell them. So she derived a fairly good income from the kitchen garden at the time. But that's how the Glin garden more or less survived. The one special feature I'd like to point out to you in these gardens is, if you notice here the apple trees, all the eating varieties are grown on what we call espalier. It's a series of metal poles with wire off them. And the reason for that is because of the lack of sunshine here in Ireland for ripening fruit. It's important that the fruit gets the maximum amount of sun morning and evening. So if you notice the apples as they grow there, all the leaves will now be cut off and they'll get sun morning and evening as the sun goes down so as to ripen the fruit on the trees. Some of the wealthier landlords came on and they lined the insides of the walls with brick. And this was useful in the sense that it took in the heat of the sun by day and discharged it at night. So they were able to grow vines and they were able to grow peaches and things like that on the walls. The wealthier ones in England, they put flues through the walls, brick flues, and they lit fires at interval and they actually heated the walls. And they could grow grapes all year round outdoors as well. But the other gardeners just left with the stone walls, and that's what you have here today, about 2.5 acres enclosed with the garden here. Now here we produced all the produce for the hotel when it was here, and it's also for cut flowers and for growing different plants that wouldn't survive outside because it's so sheltered. But in 2008 there was no option but to reseed a lot of it. A lot of it has been put back into lawns now again, the vegetable areas, because with the decline in it. And now all the fruit here, all the apples and that is picked and is all sent to Care and is crushed and made into apple juice and sold off in the local shops. So that's more or less is what's happening here. But we'll take a walk